Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Frank Zacarri. You're watching Life Altering Events. Now, we're approaching what would have been my mother's 88th birthday. She died in 2009. My dad died in January 2000, this past January, just before the COVID crisis hit. So we were lucky in that sense. We were able to see him. Now, every year around my parents' birthday, I think back to stories that they told me and that my grandparents told me about the journey to the United States. The challenges of leaving the only world they ever knew for a hope, just a hope, not a promise or a guarantee, simply a hope for a better life. And they settled in a little town called Dunkirk, New York, small town on the shores of Lake Erie. Lake Erie is a beautiful lake, 35 miles or so from Buffalo. And there I started the American dream. Now, this makes me realize once again, we're all immigrants. Our parents, our grandparents, maybe our great-grandparents, we came from somewhere. But today, we're going to look back on one of those stories of families who came to the United States with nothing but hope, and how far we have come as a second or third generation in the United States, and what we were able to gain because of the sacrifices of our ancestors. Well, my guest today is Michele Starwalt-Woods. And Michele grew up in Western New York. She was born not far from where I was born, and she lives in my hometown of Dunkirk, New York now. Now, I asked her to share her family's journey so we can all be grateful about how far we have come. Just think about the stories you heard growing up. Let me tell you something about Michele. Michele is the poster woman for community involvement. I mean, I don't know how she has time for anything. She's been the assistant governor for the Rotary. She's been on board positions with the Boys and Girls Club, Chautauqua County Youth Bureau, Prevention Works, Western New York Women, the Chadwick Bay chapter, Women and Girls Coalition of Chautauqua County. That's the county we grew up in. I grew up in. She still lives there. Chautauqua County Chamber of Commerce, the American Business Women's Association of Western New York. She's an active member of Holy Trinity Church. She's a mother, a grandmother, and recently became a new bride. So Michele, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thanks. Very, very appreciative for having me here today. And I'll be honest, when you say that I'm a new bride, or when I have to fill out paperwork at a doctor's office or something, I get a little emotional, and I get a little bit of a hot flash that goes along with it. I was divorced for 23 years. I actually was engaged at one point. My children were much younger at the time, though. My youngest daughter was 4 when I was divorced, and was several years after that I became engaged. But when I thought of the Brady Bunch households, I didn't know that we would all survive successfully. And so I broke that engagement. And I've been divorced for 23 years. So as I like to say, this is a really big deal.
I can imagine it is. I think I was almost 16 or 17 years between marriages. And it's quite an adjustment, isn't it?
It certainly is an adjustment. I keep saying it's better to have a midlife wedding than a midlife crisis.
Right. I read that statement. I was going to make sure I brought that up. Now, Michele, your family came from Poland around 1900, which is about the same time my family came from Sicily and Italy. Now, the transition to a new country where you don't speak the language, where you're sort of ostracized because you're the new people. Share some of the stories you've heard of what that was like, the journey, and then what trying to transition became.
So my grandparents, Martin and Mary Bielot, came from Poland at separate times. They were both young adults, children actually, when they came to America. They came obviously via boat across the ocean at separate times. When they found each other in the small city of Dunkirk, on their marriage certificate, it gives the place that they were baptized. And oddly enough, they were both baptized in the same parish in Poland which would roughly transcribe to, it would probably be like immaculate conception of something of that nature if you were to Americanize it. But so they were born in the same parish. They did not know one another. Their families didn't know each other. They come to America, land in Dunkirk, find one another, and then go on to have 12 children. So, and there was actually a few miscarriages and a few stillbirths in between those, but there were 12 children that did survive. My youngest, the youngest child, my mother, Bernadine Dorothy, everyone calls her Dorothy or Dottie. She's the youngest of the family, and she's actually the only one living. My Uncle Henry Hendrick was the last sibling to be alive, and he died last January. So she's the only one left now. But when my mom and my aunts and uncles talked about their life growing up, and then the stories they shared from their parents as well as their grandparents, I look at our current situation in America, and even with a pandemic and a worldwide pandemic, the adversity that they had to face could have been crippling. It could have caused them to become bitter. It could have caused them to give up hope. It could have caused them to not pursue any of the dreams that they came to America for. And that just didn't happen. My mother remembers eating lard and tomato sandwiches because they were so poor. And her father, my maternal grandfather, died in a boating accident when she was just 5 years old. So immediately when that happened, all the other older brothers and sisters quit school, quit high school, and went into factories to work, or at that time too, they were getting recruited into the service.
The story sounds so familiar with the very large families, and then something always happens when there's that many people. There was no housing codes at that time. I had, and some of my relatives died in a fire. You had some that died in a fire at the home, and there was no question about, you're going to leave. You're going to stop going to school, and you're going to go get a job because you have to provide. And that was simply the way it was. Okay. Now, with all these hardships, Michele, you just mentioned that you would think your family would become very angry and very, very bitter about what occurred. I remember hearing my grandparents' stories that they said when they left Italy and Sicily, they said, America, the streets are paved with gold. And then they got to the United States, and a lot of the streets weren't paved at all. But they never gave up. They never lost hope. So what did your family do? What were some of the activities that they got engaged with? Because these are some terrible things that happened to them.
Absolutely. And coming from such a large family, and like you said, they were ostracized. So many people, even in the city of Dunkirk, sometimes looked down on them because they did come from such a large family. They lived, the homestead was on Monroe Street, and my mom and my aunts and uncles have always said that they were one of the last homes in the city of Dunkirk to end up with running water and electricity. So my mother grew up most of her life with a coal stove and, hot water bottles to heat the bed when it was cold in wintertime. And somehow that hardship caused them to grow closer as a family. And when speaking of all the hardships, there's never a time that we cannot discuss how much their faith, their Catholic faith, meant to them, as well as their Polish heritage. That was the anchor that kept them grounded, that kept them together, and that helped them to persevere.
Now, I've heard a lot of stories because we grew up in the same area, and we're all second generation, I believe. Heard stories with my grandparents, probably with your grandparents, when they became American citizens. How did they feel? Was there a metamorphosis change when they became citizens?
My grandmother described it as the greatest day of her life. That even after she was married and even after she had all those children, the day that she became American citizen was the greatest day of her life. They went through many classes. They had to learn American history. They had to learn the language. My grandfather was not as apt in it as my grandmother was. And it was a hardship to do so. And it also cost money at that time.
Right.
So they had to make sure that they were saving enough for the classes in order to become American citizens. But my grandmother said it was truly the best day of her life. The pride that they felt as Americans, but able to carry on their Polish traditions, lasted a lifetime. And now it's continued into one generation, two generations, and even 3 to 4 generations after that.
It's an amazing story. I can recall watching over at the Columbus Club over when it was on 2nd Street or 2nd Avenue, when the people would become citizens. The way I heard it described, they stood a little taller that day. They stuck out their chest a little bit more. And one thing I always heard on the Italian side of the community, Michelle, was they never referred to Italy or Sicily by name. It was always the old country. And this is where
or the homeland, right?
Or the homeland, correct.
Mm-hmm.
I never referred to it by name. It was, that's the old country. This is the new, this is where we are now. This is what we're doing. It's almost emotional when you watch that occur. It's something else. Now, Michelle, the Polish people, like most immigrants, very proud, a lot of great traditions, a lot of great food. Tell us some of the traditions you had in your childhood, and what are you continuing now with your family?
Well, we still continue the traditional Polish Christmas Eve, where we do not have any meat. We have smoked whitefish, and in the past years, we've included some shrimp for family members. Two of my daughters are married now, and so as the family grows, we do try and have some other foods. But we do the Polish traditional Christmas Eve dinner. We have the barley, we have the smoked fish, we have the pierogi, the gołąbki. We have all those things that I grew up with, my mother grew up with, kapusta, which is beans and cabbage. and to this day, that's like one of my favorite dishes. And so we've carried on those traditions, and any of the holidays and celebrations wouldn't be nearly half as important to us if we didn't also celebrate them somehow in our church. So midnight mass has always been a favorite, or when my daughters were younger, now with the little ones, the Christmas Eve vigil is sometimes something that we may go to. And then the same thing with Easter. We still take our baskets to bless in church each year. Of course, last year was a little different because of COVID and such, but it's something that holds true to our hearts. And even though we have family members who are not Polish and didn't celebrate Polish customs, we bring them in little by little, and we make sure that they somehow can experience that faith and family feeling with all of us as well.
That's important to keep the traditions alive, particularly as the families start to separate. Like I live in San Diego, my daughters are in Phoenix, but we try as hard as we, and my brother Steve and my sister Annette are in Phoenix. So we try to keep as much of the tradition as possible alive. We also, I like your story about Christmas Eve, because that must be a Catholic type of thing, because for a while it was the seven fishes, right? Oh. And my grandmother used to make something with squid, and it was terrible. It was terrible, right? But I remember the Pope saying, children could eat whatever because you wanted the children to eat, right? And so I always recall my grandmother would make this squid thing, which was awful. All the aunts and uncles, and I had 22 cousins that lived within 2 blocks of each other, right? So all my dad, my aunts and uncles, everybody was coming in to help the kids get food and eat. And so they would be quickly eating with us before the squid thing came out. and my grandmother would get real upset. And then midnight mass, of course, you have to go to midnight mass. And my grandmother was the one who said at 10 o'clock, she wanted to go to midnight mass to get a good seat.
Oh, yes.
Right. Then afterwards, after midnight mass, you had this massive meal like you did, right? Just massive meal. go to midnight mass, come back, start all over again. So about 1 or 2 in the morning, breaking out Italian sausage, and the party starts again. And those are memories that are so great.
When my daughters and I were young, we lived right in the house next door to my Aunt Lucille and her brother Ignatius, Uncle Iggy Bielot. And for Good Friday, when we'd fast and abstinence, we would at 12 o'clock midnight, we'd be flicking the lights on and off in each other's houses saying, okay, now we can eat.
When you have cultures that revolve so much around food, and we all went to Holy Trinity, and it was an amalgamation of everybody. We had every ethnic, creed, color, whatever. It didn't much matter. And one of the things I heard from a number of the Polish friends, that the Makowiaks, the Dudeks, that were in my class, was food, and with the Italians, food was the act of love. The big gatherings didn't have any money, couldn't go on vacations.
Right.
It was the meal was the act of love, and everybody getting together and talking and sharing. Is that what it was like with you?
Oh, 100%. And of course that the women do most of the work and the preparation in the kitchen and that, but it's also a time to really bond together as family and what from one generation to the next to feel that warmth and love and respect, and then carry those traditions forward. One thing I wanted to mention, Frank, when we talked about after such hardships and trials and, eating lard and tomato sandwiches and, beheading their own chickens because they had their own chickens, and a cow for milk. And that's the way they were able to eat. When we look at my family of all 12 brothers and sisters on my mom's side, the work ethic is unbelievable. And the men who went into the service or were drafted, and then, many of the women did marry. But like my Aunt Lucille, she never married. So she worked from the time she was 16 years old until she retired. And she worked for the Fredonia Seed Company in Fredonia, New York. It's no longer in existence, but that was her first job at like the age of 16. And she worked there until the day it closed. And oddly enough, she had never received her high school diploma. So when Seed Factory closed, she was still young. She wasn't able to retire, and she was faced with finding a job somewhere. She was making decent money. She was a manager at the seed company. So she, I think it was at the age of like 45, 47, ended up having to go for GED classes and did extremely well. So she earned her GED. And then in a year, she ended up with another supervisory position at a local nursing home. And there's stories to tell like that of each of the siblings. And she and my Uncle Ignatius, my Uncle Iggy in particular, worked so hard all their lives and saved such amount of money for persons who didn't have a higher education that my family has benefited greatly from that. And because of their investments and investments in real estate, we've been able to start a fund. It's called the Bielot Family Scholarship. And in the past 3 years, we've given thousands of dollars to Catholic school children in Western New York to continue on their Catholic education, at least up until 8th grade. Just recently, we started a fund through the Northern Chautauqua Community Foundation. And that will be the first year this year where there will be a scholarship going to a Dunkirk High School senior who is planning to attend a Catholic college.
Wow, that's impressive.
I mean, I get chills when I talk about that, because when you think of the last house in Dunkirk to have running water, and then you fast forward 70 years, that's a short amount of time when you think about it. Yeah. But so much greatness has come from that hard work ethic.
They were, there was no excuses. Everybody went out and worked constantly. My mother was a similar story. She had to drop out. My grandmother worked at Red Wing, the canning factory in Fredonia, and broke her hip. And my mother dropped out of school, and she got her GED as I was going into my senior year in high school. And that was critical. She said, I have to finish before my son does. Now, you mentioned earlier that at age 16, family members dropped out. That was common. That was very common. Yet, the majority of the immigrant families made such a premium on education. My mother's statement was, "You are going to graduate from college if it kills us both." And you knew my mother, so she probably would have.
Yes, she was a saint. I loved your mother.
So what was it like with your family with the education? Was there a massive push for education?
I'm not sure that there was a massive push for higher education, but there was always that stronghold of you must do your best at all times, and you needed to set the bar very high. Mediocre, average, an 80 on a test wasn't acceptable. You had to try a little bit harder, work a little bit more to achieve what my parents wanted or what I wanted myself. So that was ingrained from a very young age. Personal responsibility, if I made a mess, I'm the one who needed to clean it up. If I remember one time my daughters were playing baseball in the back of my Uncle Iggy's yard and the window cracked. Somebody broke the window, and he took them in. I think he first made them get their piggy bank, and then brought the piggy bank into the car, and then went to Value or maybe Weiss it was at that time, to size the window and get the replacement. And then they paid for it. And then he worked side by side with them and taught them how to replace the broken window. So what existed for him when he was growing up existed even for my daughters, even though, they came from a divorced family. Those principles still were very steadfast. And
then he probably put the money back in their piggy bank after.
I'm not sure. He may not have.
Because money always seemed, I don't know where it came from, because they didn't make very much money. But they were very good. Well, they were Depression people also. So they were very good at putting money away for whatever occurred, whatever happened. You didn't ask for any money because it wasn't good, because the answer was going to be no, you're not going to get it. But they always had some. It was truly amazing. Michele, let's pivot to where you are now. Now you have your own company. Your mission, I hope I get it right, is to speak from the heart, to educate, to motivate, and to empower. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Now, I looked at one of your workshops, and one really struck me, and I loved it. It was called the Doormat Syndrome. All right. Tell the viewers, what's that about?
So I'm turning 55 in February, and when I was bracing to turn 50, I kept saying I needed to reinvent myself, that I felt I was capable of doing more, and I wanted something a little different, and I wanted a bit of my own schedule. And I kept looking, and I really wasn't finding that little niche that was so important. And I decided, after I left a job that I had for almost 15 years and was being hired by some of the people that I had worked with during that time, to just strike it out and start something on my own. And it was exhilarating. The day that I went to file my doing business as certificate at the county seat in Chautauqua and Mayville, I was nervous, I was excited, I was scared. And before I went into the building, into the clerk's office, I actually said a little prayer, and I said it to I prayed to my relatives who were such a big influence on my life. My Uncle Iggy and my Aunt Lucille especially had a very entrepreneurial spirit. My Uncle Iggy was always investing in real estate and different business dealings. And I just asked, if this is the right thing for me to do, please help me, please bless me, and move me forward.
What I love of what you just said there is, I deal with I interview a lot of people. One of the things that I hear a lot is, once you decide what you want to do, don't get stuck and lost in how am I going to do this. Okay, I went through that for many years myself. Okay, I want to do this. Now, how am I going to do it? And then you get into the minutia and the details, and then you end up moving from I want to do it to I can't do it. So the fact that you took that leap at that age is very impressive. It's very impressive. Very proud of
When
you.
I had worked at the Private Industry Council years ago, and that place closed as well. But there was, we used to have to do trainings for women who were unemployed with children who were seeking to better themselves and better their lives. And one of the things that seemed to be a common theme amongst many of them is that they were finding themselves in relationships, either personal or professional, and it didn't always have to be personal,
Right.
that were holding them back. But yet somehow, and this is true for many men and women, we find ourselves repeating the same mistakes over and over. So what is holding us back in order to achieve that dream, to enter into a better relationship, to move forward from the past that may have been cumbersome and hurtful and maybe very hard for us? Where are the stumbling blocks? And then why do we allow people to walk on us? You know, why do we end up maybe not using our voice as we should, as loudly as we can? And it doesn't have to be a caustic voice. We don't have to succeed because we're stepping on people to get there, but we also can't succeed if we're allowing people to walk all over us either. I had a couple experiences after I left the job that I absolutely loved and adored. And I ended up doubting myself a little bit. And that's not typical for me at all. I'm usually pretty confident. I'm self-confident. I'm a mover and a doer, and I can make things happen in a relatively short a time. But to have gone through maybe like a 6-month stretch of my life where I was doubting myself, I realized if this is happening to me, it must be happening to dozens and dozens of people. And so when you mentioned the doormat syndrome, Frank, that's where that came from. What are the things in our life that are being stepped on our heads or our hearts or our motive, and how do we get past it? And sometimes drawing in faith, drawing in forgiveness of others, asking forgiveness of those we hurt, and standing just a little bit taller and squaring our shoulders somewhat, we're able to move forward. We're able to make an impact and a true difference. Father Dan says it all the time. Father Dan Walsh, he's pastor of Holy Trinity Church now. Not everyone has all the gifts. Each person isn't born or aspires with all the gifts at their fingertips. We each have our strengths, but we're not good in every single category that maybe sometimes we should be good in, but we're just not. So we look at those positive traits and we focus on them, and then we move forward from that point and don't allow others to curb that enthusiasm and curb that inner drive where we want to be something more, something better.
That is so important, Michele. We get messages throughout our life. You're not good enough. You're not strong enough. You're not whatever. And if you hear it often enough, it goes into your psyche and it becomes you. Now, statements in and of itself aren't necessarily, what happens is not necessarily good or bad. It's how we react to it. Is that what you're teaching?
Yes, absolutely. And how to have a voice without being in that mode where my way or the highway. You know, there's a fine line from being assertive and being aggressive. So we talk a lot about those things in particularly in that doormat syndrome, and making peace with the past while we move forward, and not holding those hurts in our hearts, just progressing and moving on so we can be bigger and better people. And when we get to that point, we're able to do more for others. And my family's mission their entire life was working for others. Never did they take credit for all the outstanding accomplishments that they achieved, the success, the financial independence, the real estate investments, it was something far, far down the important list to them, because those decisions and those investments help them do more for others. My Uncle Iggy rented houses to many of his family members when they were kind of down on their luck or having a hard time, or maybe going through college and needing an affordable place to stay. And he never really wanted to be thanked for it. He wanted to see us take that gift and then turn it into something better ourselves.
It's a classic pay it forward, which we didn't know that term back then growing up, but that's what it is. And there's so many cases, so many people are changing careers at ages where people usually don't change careers. The financial meltdown, and now what we're going through here, we're seeing more and more people saying, I'm done with that. I want to try something new. I don't know how. And then we're back to that how question again. And that's the critical factor, is working with them as you do. Let's figure out, what is it that you like? What do you do well? Because you can get people around you to fill in the holes. Is that right?
Absolutely.
That's perfect. Well, I love your description of the Doormat Syndrome. That's incredible. You do a number of other ones, but that was the one that sort of jumped out at me when I looked at it. As we saw so much of that when you come from where, when you come from immigrants and you're first or second generation, there's this doubt that, can I do it? Should I say anything? Are they going to mock me? I don't have the fancy clothes. All of that kind of stuff comes into it. And that the work ethic is, we're going to put our head down and do what we need to do. And then we find our voice, and you helping a lot of people find their voice and making a big difference.
I think the big thing too is not being afraid to fail. We all fail, and sometimes when we don't succeed, that ends up being a driving force to push ourselves to the next level. So nothing ventured, nothing gained. That's for sure. We have to really put on a little bit of that almost suit of armor and be willing to take the knocks and the falls and know that they're going to exist and move forward from that point. One thing I wanted to mention too, Frank, is when we look at, and again, my Polish heritage with my mom on my mom's side of the family has been such a stronghold for all of us. She met my father after he experienced a horrific event in his life, and he's a proud Army veteran. He served overseas in Korea during the Korean War. When he came home from Korea, he was hired through the railroad company, and it changed hands a few times. When he retired from it, it was Norfolk and Western. But in his life, when he was a young boy and he was only 8 years old, they had a horrible house fire, and he had a younger brother. His name, everyone called him Dean, but his name was Philip Dean. Dean was getting ready to go to school with him the next day. Dean was a few years younger. He was probably getting ready to go into kindergarten. And his mother, Clarissa Starwalt, Clarissa, Clarissa, which is my oldest daughter's name, was bathing him in the sink in the kitchen. And she went to put more fuel in the kerosene heater. And what the fire investigators determined was that it wasn't kerosene, it was gasoline. Oh, so when she put the gasoline into the kerosene heater, it immediately exploded. My grandfather, Frank, and my father were already getting ready for bed. So my grandfather immediately got my dad out of the house, and he ran into the kitchen, which was, of course, in tremendous amount of flames at that time. And he got Dean out, and he tried pulling his wife Clarissa, my grandmother, out, and she had already perished. My father is currently on hospice, 91 years young in December. And I've heard more about that fire than I have in my entire 54, 55 years of life. And from those two tragedies of my mom's father drowning when she was just 5, and my father's mother perishing in a house fire, and he lost his younger brother. She was also expecting a third child at the time.
Oh my God.
The two of them joining together and building the life that they did, 100% commitment to family, 100% commitment to faith, is what has made me take this next step. Like, those people do as much good as they did in their 56 years of marriage, and I'm approaching my 55th year of life, then I should be able to impact just as many people, and hopefully maybe even more than they did
Wow. Those are incredible
in their lives
stories.
through separation.
Those are just incredible stories, Michele. We're just about out of time. With all that you've done, with all you've accomplished, what last thought would you like to leave with the viewers around the world today?
I want to say, hold your family close, love them unconditionally, forgive them for what needs to be forgiven, ask for forgiveness from the things that you have done to hurt or harm others with words or actions, and respect the veterans and the people who gave so much to our country for their entire lives. Even after they left the service, they hold America in their hearts, and they want us to succeed just as badly as we want to see our future generations succeed.
Wow. Well, thank you, Michele. As I said, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about out of time. I want to thank Michele once again for this incredible story of how far we have come. And when you look back at your family, particularly during these holidays, look back and cherish those memories. If your parents or grandparents, or if you're lucky enough they're still alive, go see them. If you can't see them, call them and thank them for all the sacrifices that they made to give us the opportunity to achieve what we have achieved. Now, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what life throws at you, please do 3 things. And Michele's hit on all 3 throughout her talk here. Look up, get up, never ever give up. Keep moving forward. Better times and better people will come into your life. Now, you can see this show on Roku TV. It'll be on my YouTube, and Michele will have a copy. So if you follow Michele, she will also have it posted. If you'd like to get a hold of her, you can get her on her website, or just contact me and I'll make sure that it gets to her. And let me leave you with this, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are in this alone. The secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Michele showed us where a number of those rocks are. Join me again next week, and we'll discuss another life-altering event. Thank you.
Thank you.